Conventions are amazing. It's the only place where you can see Bowser and Kanata Izumi drinking tea at a ramen shop while a Master Chief cosplayer takes pictures of them from afar like a creep. That probably hasn't happened in real life, but it's so insane that it can only happen at a convention. You can also find strange things at a convention like manga, signed copies of Blu-ray, keychain plushies, strange posters that are hidden in the back of the convention for whatever reason, and paddle boards. What? You get my point. Conventions are weird, but they are fun too. You probably heard of conventions like San Diego Comic-Con or Anime Expo, which are the biggest and most famous conventions in the country. But what about in other faraway lands? Ah, yes, the land of fast trains, big cities, and anime girls. Convention culture in Japan is as big as it is in the West. You see conventions dedicated to series like Greitesai for Touhou, Itachi Festa for Itachi cars, and Jump Festa for fans of Shonen Jump. However, when you look on lists of what the biggest convention is in Japan, you will most likely always see this convention at the #1 spot. Comiket. Otherwise known as the comic market, Comiket is the biggest convention in Japan and in the world. And the weirdest thing is, it isn't hosted by some big company, but rather hosted by anime manga fans for anime manga fans, and has been going on for nearly 50 years at this point. So how can an event originally made by 3 university students become the biggest convention in the world? All conventions start out small, so I suppose we will begin where it all began. 3 guys to be exact. Yoshihiro Yonezawa, Teruo Hanada, and Jun Aniwa, 3 guys studying at Meiji University, decided to start up a doujin circle, Meikyu. Doujin circles are basically fan groups that sell products like manga and games independently, so think of indie game groups if that makes sense. The reason why they became so popular in Japan was because in the 1970s, sci-fi movies became really popular and people wanted to self-publish their own works and fan interpretations of it. There was a demand for people to sell their own doujin products, and the 3 aforementioned people fill that demand with Comiket. The first event, Comiket 1, was held at the Japan Fire Defense Building in December 1975 to a warm success, featuring 32 circles and attended by at least 700 visitors. About half the circles in attendance were high school manga clubs, and others were clubs of Hoto Haigo, the mother of shoujo manga. In fact, about 90% of all people in attendance were fans of shoujo mangas since that was starting to take off at the time. Even according to legend, before the convention began, fans were camping outside the venue and loudly singing songs from anime of the time. Due to the warm success of C1, it was decided that a Comiket should be held 3 times a year during school holidays. One during spring vacation in March, one during summer vacation in July, and another during winter vacation during Christmas time. Over the years, Comiket was held in various strange places. In 1976, C2 to C4 were held at the Itabashi Industrial Coalition Building, C5 at the Ota Industrial Building, and was held there until C13 in 1979. By the end of the 70s, about 4,000 people attended and about 300 circles signed up to sell at Comiket. School club manga circles were decreasing in popularity, but in turn, more anime fan circles appear, like the ones dedicated to Gundam. By this time, Meikyu, the circle that hosted Comiket, resigned from promoting Comiket and later became its own organization. In the 80s, that was when Comiket started to explode. Most of it took place at the Harumi Fairgrounds due to the previous convention centers not having enough space and due to a little bit of drama. Attendance went from 6,000 at Comiket 14 in 1980 to 120,000 at Comiket 37 by the end of the decade. But the decade wasn't without trouble though. At Comiket 19, a group calling themselves the Revolutionaries reserved the previous venue at the Kawasaki Shinmin Plaza ahead of the Comiket, which caused a dispute among the 2 groups. The Revolutionaries wanted to introduce restrictions on attendees or take some profit according to hearsay and word of mouth. Due to the dispute, the mainstreamers moved their Comiket to the Harumi Fairgrounds, and the Revolutionaries made their own Comiket, with blackjack and hookers. They decided to call it New Comiket, later just Comic Squire, but I couldn't find any information about this online, so it likely died out soon after. Doujinshis were starting to boom during this era, with the likes of Captain Tsubasa booming amongst women, and Rumiko Takahashi, you know, the artist behind Urusei Yatsura, Ranma 1/2, and Inuyasha, booming amongst men. You would see more and more smaller groups and doujinshis creating one-off manga to sell, and due to printing becoming more affordable and higher in quantity and quality, more and more circles decided it was worth it to make a Comiket doujin, which I assume is pretty cool. Despite Comiket being a cool place of creativity and overall good energy, bad will come no matter where you go. Case in point, Tsutomu Miyazaki. When he was born, he had a physical deformity on his hand which caused him to get bullied a lot, and he used manga as an escape from reality. As he got older, he got into hentai and those types of books, and collected thousands of anime and films and was heavily influenced by the horror genre. Between 1988 and 1989, Miyazaki ended the lives of 4 minors via very horrible means. He was trying to take cheese pizza photos of 2 other minors, but was caught by the father and he fled. He was eventually arrested and sentenced to death in April 1997 for his crimes, later executed by hanging in June 2008. So why this sudden change in tone? Due to the sudden and horrible event that happened, the media condemned Comiket for whatever reason. Even a reporter shouted to participants, "There are a million Miyazakis here." That, in a mix of uncensored doujinshis causing controversy with the hotels and convention centers, caused mass cancellations and billions of yen in losses that year. Many shops had to discard food due to bad stock, and sales were below 10% of the previous seasons of the nearby restaurants. Because of the aforementioned events, an R18 doujin regulation system was introduced in the 90s. Even in the mid-90s, hundreds of fans got heatstroke waiting in line for an event, and thus had to go to the nurse's station. But, in a gruesome way, all this increased public exposure of Comiket. The 90s was a great time for the event though, seeing as 200,000 people were in attendance for the majority of the decade yearly. Classics like Sailor Moon, Evangelion, and Saint Seiya were popular during the time. A lot of doujinshis were created of them, and a lot of them were yaoi. If you don't know what yaoi is, just think of the typical My Hero Academia ship. A lot of the animation companies were not fans of this, but later opened to the idea of fans making creations behind their titles. During the mid-90s, more doujin related industries began to expand, like bookstores specializing in doujinshis, cosplay clothing stores, and even doujinshi stores ran by doujin circles. After Comiket 50, the venue had to change because the World Trade Fair Hall, the main venue at Harumi, was closed. They changed the venue to the Tokyo Big Sight, which would be the mainstay for the event for years to come. Some fans criticized the move as it apparently hurted Comiket's reputation of being an amateur event run by amateurs, but the move helped the copyright holders be more accepting of fan creations, and the bigger size of the venue definitely helped with the growing attendance. By the end of the 90s, attendance grew upwards of 400,000, and upwards of 30,000 doujin circles were selling their works. Gala games were growing in popularity amongst men, with games like Sakura Taisen, Two Heart, and I think you can include Touhou Project with this definition. Things were starting to mature with Comiket, with events being held there for 3 days starting with Comiket 54, and big companies presenting their products there. It wasn't all gloom though. Incidents like the Tokimeki Memorial Video incident in 1988 and the Pokemon Doujinshi incident in 1999, yes, those are the names, challenged the idea of what you can do with intellectual property. With Tokimeki, there were VHS tapes of the infamous Dogi Magi Imagination adult anime. About 900 copies were being sold at Comiket, but unfortunately they got into the hands of a mainstream magazine which got the attention of Konami. They were pretty pissed off, so they sued the circle that made the tape. The circle claimed that the character was not technically Shiori from apparently Tokimeki, but it was kinda obvious that it was Shiori. The court ruled in Konami's favor, and thus all remaining tapes, including the master, had to be destroyed and damages had to be paid to Papa Konami. Nintendo did the same thing with a Pokemon Doujinshi only a year later. This made Doujinshi animators really wary on what they can do, since these two cases enable companies to go after Doujinshis just because they can, and it's unfortunately still a problem that happens to this day. However, that did not stop Comiket in the community in the slightest. In the 2000s, attendance grew to 500,000. Shonen Jump and Moe were growing in popularity amongst men, and Full Metal Alchemist grew amongst women. This was during an era where the Comiket event has matured. Consignment shops like Toro no Ana and Melon Books increased their scope of operations, and the rise of the internet allowed for doujins to shine more and reach further in scope. Though, as time progressed, companies and doujinshis treated the event more as a general otaku store more than a place for creativity, which changed expectations and the shared values of the event. But the core values still remain according to Comiket themselves. There are no customers at a comic event. Despite all that, the event is still flourishing today with a consistent attendance of 500,000 per year at the Tokyo Big Sight. There are events that happen every 5 years called Comiket special events that take place at different venues, like one that happened in Okinawa, another at the Iseijin Izomi Chokita building, and the most recent happening at an older venue, the Makuhari Messe venue. The next Comiket will be Comiket 100 and is set to be the biggest one after the cancellation of Comiket 98 due to the virus. Many series started and derived by doujin culture and by association Comiket. Think of series like Touhou and Fate, but also ones you wouldn't expect like Higurashi no Naku Koro Ni and maybe like another I haven't heard of. Cosplaying got popular thanks to Comiket, which happens to be really popular amongst women there for some reason. So much so that there is a dedicated section at the west wing of the venue that allows people to dress up in their cosplays. Still, there are problems relating to how crowded the event is, and the obvious language barrier doesn't exactly help us foreigners. But despite that, it truly is a cool place to go as a nerd. Hopefully I will go there one day and heck, maybe even see you. But for now, we as brothers and sisters can enjoy looking at videos of people walking around the sweaty convention center. If you want to watch more Comiket stuff, I recommend watching the documentary The Fragile Heart of Moe. It's 12 years old, but it gives an interesting insight into how the history of doujin phenomenon itself happened. Alright my brothers, at least for now, this is where I get off. Alright, I'm out.